At first, she didn't give it much mind, but occasionally, she heard the distant roar of motorbike engines cut through the air, traveled through picturesque areas. But the revving quickly became louder and more violent, until Emma's path was blocked by 3 huge bikes that screamed to a stop. Riders wearing bandanas and tattered leather coats came off, their hardened expressions showing something like amusement. Emma's pulse pounded as she cornered an innocent child, a darker thrill. When she was 9 years old, she realized that these grown males were physically stronger than her. However, there was a glimmer of relief as a silent bulwark stood in Rex's presence. A man with a scar zigzagging across his cheek leaned forward, sneering. Between her and raw terror, the top motorcyclist. His voice oozed contempt as he spoke to the lost little girl behind him. The third chuckled and casually held out a chain, allowing it to clink menacingly. Rex imitated Emma's tense head and low fangs as she stepped back with a bang. Beat an A. The soldiers exchanged a muffled snarl, but he did not strike without a clear order or prompt encouragement. "What's up?" The scar biker Jared. "I'm afraid you're mute." Emma clenched her fists, remembering her father's orders to stay, but she couldn't help you. Calmly assess the situation and have faith in Rex if things go out of hand. Words of intimidation would end, but suddenly one biker lunged forward, pretending to attack Emma, as if to startle her right away. Rex sprang into action with A. He placed himself between Emma and the biker's outstretched hand as the bark shook the dirt road. The men paused at the exhibition of aggression, and one of them gave a startled, oath-scarred cheek. Apparently offended that a dog would confront him, his smile turned into a snarl, and the mutts were bitten. He snarled to check if it was sufficient to deal with us, and Emma's breath caught. Acknowledged the crucial point that these were not men who would abandon a bulldog that they might challenge, or perhaps hurt. He recalled her father's stern words, "Don't let fear stop you." Trust that the training allowed Rex to perform his duties without her realizing it. The strain behind Rex's twitching muscles bunching under his shiny fur. Just seconds before violence broke out, a car abruptly turned the curve in front of them. When the driver noticed a child being cornered by bikers, they slowed down. The driver honked at the dog in the center, but he wasn't sure whether to stop it. For a brief minute, it appeared as though the biker with the chain was reconsidering open assault as he muttered curses. May scattered to evade attention from the public, but Scar Cheek barked in order to step forward once again, chain rattling in his own. Emma realized that she couldn't avoid confrontation at all because her hand was moving so quickly. When confronted, Rex, her father's voice reverberated in her head. "You can do what's necessary," she muttered subtly. Command a brief code word under her breath, and Rex's position instantly changed. The dog's training eyes were fixed on the man, and every muscle tensed like a loaded spring. This wasn't casual hostility. Rather, it was the heightened concentration of a K9 ready to eliminate a threat in the next few seconds. Felt unreal as Rex lunged with calm precision as Scar raised his chain. The other 2 motorbike riders were stunned and attempted to scramble as jaws snapped around the man's forearm, causing him to drop the weapon. Rex swung fluidly away from, or swung at the dog, knocking down a second biker in the process. Off balance, causing him to collapse onto the tarmac. Emma stood nearby, her pulse pounding with both terror and marveled at the puppy that had spent the previous nights on her comfortable bedroom floor. The scenario swiftly intensified once she changed into a protective force that was reminiscent of her father's old K9 stories. The biker successfully kicked Rex in the flank, causing him to snarl in rage, but Rex didn't let up, successfully maintaining the onlookers from the stopped car now yelled for the men to back off as they approached Emma, who was pinned in half by the scar. He attempted shaking Rex's off while kneeling and yelling obscenities, but the dogs. He would not be released from training until the threat subsided or Emma gave the standoff child the order to do so. 3 bikers reeling from the shock behind a very good K9 became the pivot for all that happened to Emma. She was relieved that Rex had taken charge, but she was concerned about the dog's safety in case the man got out of hand. More witnesses piled out their phones as the second car drew closer, raising the bikers. Emma shook when she saw their bluster and looked around at the gathering audience, realizing they had lost the advantage. Collapse, and in the silence of that pivotal moment, Rex's resolute position made it obvious that Emma wouldn't suffer any injury today. The tiny group of people surrounding Emma and Rex tightened their yells and urged each other as the tires skidded on the damaged road. Rex held jaws lightly while warning others who were furious at the bikers' bold behavior in the midst of this unexpected tempest. However, another motorcyclist was sitting on the ground, nursing a wounded knee, while the third was holding tight to the biker's arm. Emma stood motionless as a wieldy chain dangled from strained fingers, shaky but buoyed by the realization that she was no longer alone. Mara, the local grocery clerk, pushed through the crowd and said, "I called the police," voiced Howe indignantly, saying that they will arrive at any moment after learning that the two free bikers exchanged furious glances, with Rex pinning one of them and yelling obscenities, but the dog's uncompromising presence dimmed the swagger, and following a brief standoff, the chain-wielding biker started to retreat, murmuring that this wasn't worth the hassle, while his friend, who was still limping, struggled to. A battered Paya blasted upon the scene before they could escape. Behind the wheel, Emma's father stepped out, his face set in worry, his heart thumping at. When Rex saw his daughter surrounded by strangers and a mob, he immediately barked a warning in full protective mode. The German shepherd immediately freed the biker's arm after giving a harsh instruction in the same coded language Emma had employed. With a final rumbling snarl, the pinned man stepped back and retreated, holding. Emma's father quickly positioned himself between the rider and his injured forearm, which was leaking blood through his fingers. And Emma motioning the audience to keep their distance, he inquired, "Is anyone hurt?" Despite the adrenaline pumping through him, he spoke steadily, and a tense silence caused one of the bikers to spat on the ground, claiming that the dog was psychotic, but the father chose to disregard the taunt. Emma stumbled as her name was called, and her little form was examined for damage. Now that the immediate threat has passed, welling sobs into his arms, pressed up against them, keeping a close eye on the enemies from the edge. The chain-wielding biker assessed the atmosphere to see whether he could take back control, but the approach of the conflict was evident due to the presence of other neighbors and the distant sirens' cries. It was finished when the cops finally showed up, two officers in uniform stepping cautiously from their cruiser. When the crowd parted to allow them to pass, the father spoke out and quickly described how these bikers had intimidated Emma and threatened to harm her, and Rex, who had been trained by him, had behaved in. Some bystanders supported the story that the males had trapped the child in self-defense and the battered bleeding. The biker swore that he was the victim, displaying his wounded arm while observing Emma's quivering body and listening to. According to several witness accounts, the cops motioned for paramedics to tend to him as they resolved the situation. Tension remained high during legalities, particularly when an officer noticed Rex's weary hand hovering close to his holster. In response to me, the father raised a calming palm and called out A. Rex lowered his hackles in response to the calm release instruction, but he stayed at Emma's side in a protective position. When the spectators saw that the dog wouldn't attack without cause, they became much calmer. A fresh wave of. When the police asked the bikers to identify themselves, there was drama. Scar, the one who had been pinned by Rex, spotted justifications for not naming the chain wielder maintained that they had just slightly frightened the child and that any accusations of assault were exaggerated. But as bystander phone footage revealed how the bikers surrounded Emma as soon as the father arrived, and when the dog's defenses broke down, the parent felt a mixture of anger and relief, discovered that he was more willing to cooperate with the authorities than he had before vowed never to go back to the police enforcement field after departing from the canine unit. But he was compelled to reactivate those reflexes to keep Emma safe while Emma battled in astonishment of the biker's violence, thankfulness for Rex's bravery, and regret that she had frozen. She briefly held on her father's sleeve as the men lunged, still in shock at what had happened. Rex, who had previously seemed normal, now panted excessively and looked about the group as if. Paramedics looked at the father's slight abrasions from the altercation Emma was in, expecting more threats. Felt tears streaming down her face as she pondered whether Rex would be punished for biting a human. Even in support of his defense, an officer came with a notepad to collect Emma's. Her father carefully led her as she described the experience, starting from the moment the bikers stopped her and ending with the Rex intervened after receiving a coded command, and the officer's countenance changed from one of skepticism to one of respect. He informed them, while taking notes on trained canine behavior, that under the dog's actions would probably be considered necessary in cases when there is obvious violence towards a minor and several witnesses. Self-defense, Emma sighed shakily with relief, although she was aware that the formal procedure might still be difficult at. Finally, the police took the 3 motorbike riders away, 2 of them in handcuffs and 1 off too. As the sirens faded, silence descended upon the audience at the hospital under surveillance for sutures. Neighbors looked at Emma, her father, and Rex in the distance with respect and a hint of wonder at one elderly woman who operated a little fruit stand by the side of the road, came up to Emma with a shaky voice of sympathy and gave her a reassuring pat on the. She whispered to you and that dog, "How did you stay so?" Poor shoulder. Emma realized she hadn't been bold on her own because of her father's teaching when she glanced up at him after looking down at Rex. Her cornerstones were Rex's everlasting loyalty. "I just trusted him," she said. The father cradled her in a protective embrace while softly petting the dog's ears and whispering phrases she couldn't quite place it. But in the hours that followed, Emma's father led her home with a powerful feeling in her heart, pledging to deal with any legal or media fallout. But the phrase miracle spread. A dog's exceptional aptitude in saving an innocent youngster from an urgent threat amid neighbors had passed. The riders were still being held, or at least monitored at the hospital. The actual fallout from the altercation was only getting started, as it quickly spread throughout small villages and even. Would Emma and Rex receive negative feedback, or become local heroes more quickly on social media, from people who disapproved of animals with such strong training? And how would this incident affect Emma and Rex's continued relationship? Now that all of the dog's talents were known, one thing stood out among the many uncertainties. As twilight set, Emma, her father, and her strong German shepherd would never be as peaceful or easy as they had been. Emma was laying in bed that night, reliving every experience, but she was deeply appreciative of Rex's presence and felt unsettled. Acknowledged a story and an enduring bond created in a single terrifying moment. The day following Emma's traumatic experience with the motorcyclists, however, a cautious calmness fell over the. Word got around the neighborhood that her dog, Rex, a German shepherd with an unremarkable appearance, had rejected 3 men with ease, while several neighbors appeared unsure about how to respond. Others, particularly those in Emma's family, were merely pleased that she was safe. But Emma's, once a private individual who refrained from discussing his police history, the father now had to answer queries from. The local newspaper even published a little article about trained dog rescues for curious townspeople, youngster from potential attackers. Yet beneath this exterior serenity lies a deep-seated brooding. The biker who ended up in the hospital had already been released, while 2 others were still being held. Although there were only minor injuries, there were rumors that their larger gang was a notorious club, infamous for small-time offenses, hated the humiliating arrest, and was considering vengeance. However, these claims were unsubstantiated. The whispers were enough to make Emma's father furious, because he had spent enough time training canine units to understand the crooks who felt cornered or ashamed and frequently acted more aggressively. He also recognized his daughter's looks and, in fact, her name may now be moving through risky loops in this tense environment. The story's first significant turn came when Emma's father got a call from Captain Ruiz, an old co-worker. "I was still employed with the local police department when I learned of what had transpired," Ruiz stated. "Together, we have intel that these motorcyclists may have stolen stuff or drugs, and they are part of a larger network." Ruiz proposed Emma's, as the father wouldn't tolerate looking foolish in a small-town altercation. Family members should exercise caution and perhaps move for a few weeks until the bikers gang was charged. Ruiz suggested that since there was a little daughter involved, it was better to be safe than sorry. Emma was only 9 years old, so how could he uproot her? The father half expected such a warning, but hearing it out startled him. The father debated whether to tell her on short notice and how to do so without making her even more afraid. To inform her of the possible danger. Although brave, she was still a little girl in shock from one horrific experience already keeping it from her. But it felt dishonest and like a breach of the faith she had put in. Emma, oblivious to her father's personal predicament, attempted to resume her regular routine at school, lured with math assignments and conversation during playtime, while several students talked excitedly about the attack. Some older children were astonished to learn that Emma's adorable puppy was a deadly guardian, teasing that she must be a. Emma blushed as a secret superhero, but she felt uncomfortable with the attention. Her daily routine was subtly tinged with worry. What if the motorcyclist or worse appeared again one breezy after? At noon, a battered motorbike roared past the school fence, giving her a partial answer in the most unexpected way. Emma's pulse flipped the rider as she froze in the middle of a discussion with a friend, appeared to glance towards the playground while wearing a helmet with a tinted visor. Then the engine revved, and the motorbike took off. Was it a casual bystander or something more sinister? Emma's father had started. When he arrived to pick her up from school after the event, he frowned at her strained demeanor, and she told him about The father sighed deeply as he realized that the strange biker might be getting closer that night. Parts of Ruiz's warning that these individuals would try to bother us again were finally revealed. He said this while gently seating Emma in the. Rex is resting watchfully at her feet in the living room. Perhaps we should stay. Emma cried, because she didn't want to leave her house after spending a week or two with your aunt in a different town, or her friends, nor did she like to think that fear should force them to abandon their lives. But it was evident that her father was concerned. Inscribed on his face, "Emma, we must be intelligent," he demanded until we were certain the possibility that the bikers group is larger and more vindictive than a random trio emphasized the hazards. Emma felt secure as she glanced at Rex, who had previously come to her rescue, and questioned whether even a skilled K9 could protect her from a resolute bunch that looked at his daughters. Anxiety tried to reassure her by suggesting that you and Rex continue practicing in a safer setting for the time being. He forced a comforting grin when he said, "You're training there." But Emma didn't like that answer. As if the motorcyclist had more influence on her family's lives than they were due, she timidly acknowledged defeat. "Propose another viewpoint. Couldn't we at least check to see if the cops can keep us safe here or obtain additional information regarding the." Her father paused, considering the constraints of tiny gang schemes. Although they were few in number, the local constable and town law enforcement was capable, and without official encouragement, they could only do so much, even though their father's previous connections in the city would be helpful. Armitage, an old neighbor, contributes to the whirlpool of issues had grown to like Emma, and one night when Rex dropped by, she told how she had seen a rough biker who wasn't like the first trio to skulk by the mailbox across the street, but Ms. Although Armitage was unable to verify his objectives, the father noticed a pattern that the group was examining the area and perhaps looking for vulnerable spots or an unguarded opportunity. Moses Armitage gave her own advice, saying, "Be wise, dear, and don't let fear rule you," concerning who is hiding. But oddly, in the midst of these growing tensions, Emma's relationship with. Every day, they practiced quick drills in the yard obedience orders posture, and Rex got stronger. Regarding control, the father emphasized the value of self-control and reminded Emma that he's not a weapon. Emma nodded gravely. "Your ally we only protect, never attack without cause." Fearful of how it suddenly felt required in daily life, but proud of Rex's talent, this was the first significant twist that the disagreement shifted from a one-time altercation to a continuous threat between the bikers and Emma's will to maintain normalcy, her father's protective instincts, and the looming threat of criminals. A standoff was set up that required more than a dog's fast reactions. It required the readiness of the community, the solidarity of the family, and the steadfast bravery of a young girl. Despite the chill of imminent peril, life had to continue despite the potential storm on the horizon. Emma's father, who had previously mostly kept his knowledge of K9S under wraps, was forced into a protective. He took Emma to school every morning, keeping an eye on the rearview mirrors for. Rex sat stoically outside the playground gate every afternoon, keeping an eye out for any sight of the dangerous biker gang. His side parents, who had before only waved hello, now lingered interested and somewhat impressed by the dog's composure. Emma, the young lady whose dog repelled those, arrived with disciplined bearing and soft murmurs. Thugs, they murmured, some in awe, some in fear. Emma herself battled with a range of feelings. On the one hand, having Rex made her feel safer than ever, although her father was clearly protecting her. But the idea of scary guys planning retaliation kept her awake at night. She would wake up sweating from being restless and picturing the roar of motorcycle motors. Sensing her nocturnal concern, Rex would pat over to her bedroom window. Her bedside gently nuzzled her till she fell back into a restless slumber, but she was reassured. Couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that she had lost some of her purity as a child. While the local constable, he discreetly increased patrols in the neighborhood after learning of a group of furious bikers. His cruiser, at strange hours, headlights swept across the black lawns as they rolled past Emma Street. When he visited Emma's father's home, he whispered about leads. I can't believe that these men were part of a multi-state organization known for intimidation and small-time crime. He adjusted his belt and said, "We'll do everything we can keep an eye out for this, but promise they won't come sniffing around." Emma's father recognized that even keeping Emma safe at home presented a new issue as the circumstances changed. It wasn't enough. If the group wanted to follow through on their threats, they might try to corner her at any point in the school. One evening during supper at the store or possibly a friend's house, he politely suggested that they think of moving temporarily, maybe to Emma's aunt's house in 2 towns till. After the bikers' presence subsided and all accusations were filed, Emma's immediate. She protested in a way that was passionate yet understandable because she didn't want to leave her friends, her home, or her routine. Hesitant voice that she was looking for a middle ground and refused to live in fear. A neighborhood watch system was created by a father and a few worried neighbors. Tobias, a retired Army sergeant, lived down the road. He offered to work late shifts, driving his pickup around the block with Mrs. Hernandez, who ran the local diner. Promised to monitor any out-of-town patrons who inquired excessively, including the elderly MIRS Armitage. Although no one acknowledged it, the neighbor pledged to surreptitiously check her curtains for any strange behavior. The community as a whole had united, resolved not to allow children, and Emma in particular, to be terrorized just yet. Emma's father was aware that despite all these safety measures, they were facing more than simply vigilant eyes. If danger materialized, they might require Rex's protective skills once more. This insight drove him to. He warned Emma, "We can't rely on luck," as they conducted brief exercises in order to reinforce her command structure. "If something occurs in the backyard again, we need you and your team to act fast." He calmly and securely led her through hand gestures, verbal clues, and the important stand-down order that avoided using too much force. Even though Emma usually, being bright-eyed throughout training, came with a burden, as they realized that these exercises were no longer a game. The local freelance writer Hawkins, who has a knack for human interest topics, rose to fame. By doing a more thorough interview with Emma's father, I was captivated by the dynamic of a father-daughter duo bound by canine strategies. She wrote a brief essay titled, "When Danger Strikes Home A." The manuscript spread in a hush-hush fashion, despite her father's apprehension over the family's attachment to their protecting dog. Requested her to refrain from publishing details that could attract greater attention to Emma's. Mrs. Hawkins honored that line, but her interest simply increased. It's not often that a trained canine lives with a civilian child, she thought as she jotted down notes, and Emma's father just shrugged. Family. His remarks were tinged with the gravity of what had just happened. While the danger's shadow lengthened one afternoon, the father saw a black motorbike skulking in the distance. Crossroads. The rider was looking towards Emma's school when the bike sped away, leaving him uneasy. However, Tobias also reported seeing 2 strange males idling close to the empty lot by the business in a tinted vehicle. Each time someone approached, they peeled away, whether it was an innocent coincidence or not. The constable kept a record of suspicious sightings but lacked hard evidence, so the father discreetly reported them to him. Misconduct. The law could only remain vigilant but constrained in this. Surroundings. Emma unexpectedly found solace in Rex's steadfast devotion. Every muscle in the dog's body was sensitive to her presence whenever she went outside to read or play. "Feel suppressed," Emma told her father, drawing courage from his watch. In more reflective moments, she considered how fate had brought them together, as if he knew I was afraid and wanted me to feel safe. How a danger had demonstrated the silent power of a dog's training to her on that desolate road. Emma was concerned that another altercation may occur, but her playmate Rex had come to represent perseverance. First, would they have to depend on Rex to deal with violence again? The idea made her sick, and she longed for a life in which she could continue to tread the same dusty road without constantly looking for. Perhaps in the shadows, Rex could have a typical dog life instead of standing watch like a stressed-out sentinel. "This is ended," she whispered to the dog, caressing his ears. "Go back and explore the fields without fear, just freedom." As though accepting the wish, Rex blinked his tongue and lulled for a moment, setting the scene. Was prepared for a tipping point with guarded authorities, protective neighbors, and Emma was protected by her father's vigilant training. But the biker's vindictive aura persisted on the edges that may rip that shield apart in the silence of that unknowable. Emma and Rex readied themselves individually for the day or night that their newfound reality would put them to the test. Once more, and the father realized in that silent strain that every bit of talent he gave his daughter and her dog may soon be put through the ultimate test, where one mistake might cost more than simply tranquility. But the secure future Emma's father deserved had largely maintained his family's schedule. She continued to attend school, and Rex continued to go with her on cautious walks under adult supervision and kept up his part-time work to help pay for their small house. But there was a hint of every element of their everyday lives was impacted by tension, and the usually amicable banter between neighbors frequently devolved into voiced worries about those motorbike riders as rumors circulated on social media concerning. Amidst this simmering anxiety, there are a number of new subplots and problems, including an impending confrontation. The first hurdle came as the net tightened around Emma and her father. When a local animal rights organization learned that a dog trained to use canine had repelled intruders without fully understanding they were concerned that the animal would be overworked or put in danger. One afternoon, Representative Green courteously showed up at the father's house. Surprised and a little insulted, he led her into the living room and asked to view Rex's living arrangements. Room where Rex happily relaxed next to Emma, a picture of serene devotion. The father insisted he was fine and refused to provide specific training techniques despite Green's moderate pushing. Cared for and only responds when threatened. However, Ms. Green went without a fight, implying that her organization would keep an eye on things to make sure there was no exploitation of. Emma's family never requested the additional level of scrutiny that the dog brought. Meanwhile, the local media picked up on Emma's rescue story after a regional news reporter heard it indirectly. Asked the constable for an interview. The cautious constable confirmed in a careful statement that a trained dog had stepped in after motorcycles threatened the minor. Disseminated online, eliciting praise for Rex's bravery, as well as alarm from others who called it deadly dog in Emma's father observed the growing conversation in the family environment while a ticking time bomb, fearing that sensational stories could lead to new problems, especially if the biker associates came across these. Research and discovered that Emma's father was not just any civilian, but had previously worked as a canine trainer. A third plotline surfaced when concerned Emma's school parents petitioned the administration to prohibit harmful animals from being on school grounds. Despite Emma's father's insistence that Rex never enter the school grounds, the dog usually waited outside with him in fear. A small group of parents, including Emma's, were concerned about a canine that might attack children. Ms. Caldwell, a teacher, attempted to stop the gossip by informing parents that Rex had protected Emma from adult attackers rather than peers, while some claimed that the principal discovered that a dog with the ability to subdue adult offenders was a risk in an atmosphere where children were present. Middle met with Emma's father to set clear rules regarding Rex's whereabouts during drop-off. Pickups and drop-offs are an unwanted but possibly essential compromise to calm public anxiety. Additionally, there was a renewed sense of possible peril as Toby, the father's longtime buddy and former canine handler, came prepared with information of how biker gangs occasionally sought payback after traveling from out of state to assist Toby. Despite being appreciative of Toby's assistance, the father became increasingly nervous weeks or even months following an initial embarrassment. The fact that Toby was an old co-worker from the father's canine days spoke a lot, was an implicit acknowledgement that this danger might be more than what a small-town constable could manage. Toby silently looked around the neighborhood recommendations for improving motion-activated lighting for home security, reinforced doors, and Emma receiving a brief safety refresher course. While away from Rex, Emma dealt with her own difficulties on that puppy girl's whispers followed her down the hallways, where several of her classmates followed, stood amazed, calling her a hero for fearlessly leading a police-style canine, while others made fun of her, suggesting she used the dog to attract attention. But despite the teacher's attempts to help, Emma's emotional burden was quite great. Told her best friend Lily that she missed the times when nobody was interested in how her father made a living or how Lily was her particular puppy, but Emma couldn't be protected from. Rex's behavior changed slightly, but he remained obedient due to the persistent rumors in the middle of these escalating tensions. He lingered closer, observing the windows, sensing Emma's frequent worry at home, and doors more carefully than before if an engine roared too loudly or a car backfired close to Rex. Would snarl in warning and maintain a stiff posture until Emma or her father told him that everything was okay and that the dog seemed to be stuck in a hyper-vigilant condition that mirrored Emma's own. Fear the father realized that although vigilante readiness protected them, also drained them day by day, till a little respite came when Mrs. Hawkins, a kind neighbor with a talent for community planning, recommended a constructive activity, a neighborhood dog appreciation day in the town park that combines community service and fundraising. The concept of highlighting stories while honoring canine heroes who lived among them, like Emma, in an effort to calm fears and warn the community that even well-trained kinds could be friends rather than threats. Emma became happier at the idea and pictured being a frightening incident into a unifying one. But the father was hesitant for fear of publicity. Miss Hawkins, Rex's skills could also incite the bikers or draw unwanted notice from other crooks. Resolved to manage it covertly, showcasing several local dogs in addition to Rex. The father debated whether to keep a low profile or enjoy the support. And finally, a sinister rumor surfaced. Several motorcycles have been sighted in a nearby county through Toby's contacts, purportedly inquiring about an elderly canine officer and his canine companion. Whether Toby couldn't tell if the questions were sincere or just idle posturing, but it highlighted how the father's concern grew every day, fearing that if a second altercation broke out, will the authorities be sufficient to keep Emma safe, or will Rex and Emma's father need to use their own abilities once more to safeguard her? Safe. Therefore, several new levels of public confrontation were established. Arguments about school policy and possible bikers under investigation from animal rights voices. Emma and Rex are stuck in the center of a community that is trying to reconcile a heroic dog with residual anxieties and revenge. Continued living a somewhat regular life, but the father maintained a close check on Toby, who remained silent and ready to answer. The unsaid fear that shrouded the peaceful streets after each minor victory, like as Emma's peers showed caution and appreciation, new issues arose that endangered their fragile peace. It was evident that the result would change if or when the bikers returned. Might depend on a community's readiness to unite against intimidation, as well as Rex's skills. The small town was covered in a gentle drizzle, which added to the tensions already simmering in Emma's life. Began an odd morning routine that included breakfast with her father, a brief training session in the backyard, and Rex had a stressful commute to school and quiet afternoons spent under her father's or her neighbor's close supervision. But after the initial panic over the biker incident had passed, a persistent sense of unease continued to influence every decision. After discussion on a gloomy Friday afternoon, Emma ended up in Ms. Caldwell's office, the school counselor. Emma's homeroom teacher had recommended a brief conversation since she was worried about the shadows beneath her eyes and her restless behavior in class. The counselor inquired kindly, "Are you sleeping okay?" Emma paused and, tensed her shoulders before confessing that she frequently saw those roaring motorcycles in her dreams. Every night she jolts because of the menacing swing of the chain and Rex's fierce interference. The counselor listened closely, half expecting headlights to glare through her window, and confirmed Emma's. She reassured the girl that it's acceptable to be afraid after experiencing a genuine trauma. Uncomfortable and perhaps afraid, she suggested writing, breathing techniques, or just. While the father struggled with his concerns, Emma found it both reassuring and intimidating to discuss her strategies. His own personal struggle made him want to allow Emma to return to her carefree existence. But the Mrs. Green from the animal rights organization hadn't let go of her, and the threat from the biker gang felt too real. Worries that she had covertly started asking people for statements throughout town, perhaps with the intention of filing a complaint if she. The father found the situation extremely unpleasant and thought that Rex's training was excessive. However, Rex's discipline had saved. Emma, while others called it animal weaponization, divided between protecting Rex's skills and making sure they weren't abused, but he was aware of how difficult their situation had been at the same time. Miss Hawkins kept organizing her Dog Appreciation Day in the hopes of changing the public's perception from one of fear to one of respect for service dogs. She went over to Emma and her father and asked them to show off some safe canine maneuvers in order to protect families. Controlled setting with only compliance and rescue orders. No violence. Emma's eyes glowed at the thought of having the opportunity to show others her brave companion's tender side, but her father was hesitant to place Rex in another public spotlight because he was worried that we would encourage more trouble, he said, keeping in mind the attention that the bikers and others were receiving. Has us on their radar, and we could become much more of a target, M. Hawkins, if we parade Rex. Acknowledged his prudence, but begged that by informing others, this event could allay anxieties. People who handle K9S responsibly may be able to disarm the negativity Emma tore. As Lily's father made the last call to her, a new emotional layer surfaced between exhilaration and anxiety. Although appreciative, the father's close friends provided them a temporary place to stay until things calmed down. Lily's father countered that Emma's father had declined, saying that we would simply be moving the bullseye to your house. Emma was heartbroken as she heard their whispered talk from the next room and realized that she was disappointed. How much her father cared for everyone, not just himself, was another issue that came up with the doctor. The sole veterinarian in the community with some expertise in cutting-edge canine treatment, Braxton, heard rumors about Emma's. In a quick phone conversation, Dr. Braxton advocated for a more balanced approach, suggesting that the father might move or conceal Rex, that offered to act as a spokesperson in the event that Ms. Green of the Animal Rights Organization expressed more serious concerns. Rex is well. Dr. Braxton, who had a well-trained canine, claimed to have saved Emma's life. Emma's father felt relieved that he wasn't the only one who had doubts about the morality of his instruction. This battle, but the more people publicly exposed him, the more he fears, defended Rex, the more obvious their predicament became, maybe attracting the biker's attention once more. Emma's emotional well-being oscillated between resilience and vulnerability, found solace in little triumphs, such as receiving a handwritten card from a school classmate that forever praised Emma and Rex. Heroes, but she also trembled every time a strange motorbike roared by in the distance, partly anticipating another ambush. Sometimes I wish we hadn't gone. She confided in Rex one day in a peaceful backyard, tears streaming down her face. She muttered, "I wish you could just be my dog, not some scary trained fighter," as the dog inclined his head during that walk. As if understanding her distress, the father softly rubbed against her while studying these strains and realized that additionally, he struggled with guilt with his insistence on rigorous canine training. He thought back to his time in the police department, witnessing how criminals were either a blessing that saved Emma or a curse that now marked them. Frequently attacked the families of police who had previously crossed them. At the time, he had no children, just other canine handlers and A. Nevertheless, Emma's safety now took precedence over everything, leaving him with little breathing room. Night after night, he fell asleep in a chair in the main area, one ear alert for any noise, a hand close to Rex's leash. in the event that they had to react quickly through all of these layers to ongoing bike sightings in school. Anxious neighbors, uneasy activists, and the father's awareness that the pressure was mounting for an inevitable. Some towns were confused by the biker gang's veiled hostility. People's disagreements about Rex's job and Emma's internal strife might come together in one explosive moment unless something suggested that the first Ms. Hawkins dog event may act as a uniting exhibit of human faith in dogs, or it may lead to the very conflict they were afraid of. In that tense silence, Emma's father seized her, and doing nothing felt like waiting for catastrophe. He put a gentle hand on her shoulder and murmured, "We need to be prepared for whatever comes." His voice was low but, "Resolutely remember your instruction, but bear in mind that you are still a child, and it is your responsibility to stay safe and rely on adults to manage the remainder." Emma nodded, tears sparkling in the corners of her eyes, and wished that Rex would be lying it there. With their feet snorting as if they were acknowledging the father's words, they established a tiny fortress of confidence between them in the midst of whirling anxieties. So as the day turned to night, each individual struggled with Emma's emotional struggles and her longing for her father's lost simplicity in childhood. Ms. striking a balance between invasive public scrutiny and parental protectiveness. In their visions of the dog, Green and Ms. Hawkins are at conflict, and they are hiding in the serves as a final test for an enraged gang that may still come seeking revenge. Hung over the horizon, where these intricate dilemmas would either meet their demise or be resolved by a brisk wind shattered the unbreakable bond between a child and her exceptional dog. Emma's neighborhood's sparse limbs, signaling the arrival of early autumn and the change in season, did little to ease the underlying tension, and Emma could feel it every time a motorbike engine rumbled in the distance. Rex listened to her, half certain that another confrontation was imminent. Anxiety reacted with watchful gazes and a constant willingness to defend in this tense environment. Ms. Hawkins continued with her puppy plan. Appreciation Day in the neighborhood park in an effort to strengthen favorable opinions about well-tread dogs, particularly in. She shared flyers of happy children cuddling amiable Labradors in response to the commotion surrounding Rex's protective abilities. Include the tactful reference to a canine demonstration by special guests. Oddly, the reference to a brave dog from our neighborhood piqued people's curiosity. Some were anxious to learn more about the person behind the headlines, while others were uneasy about. The story raised concerns that a dog that has attacked criminals might suddenly attack the father. Reluctantly consented to allow Emma and Rex to take part, but only under strict supervision. Display that demonstrated compliance with non-coercive rescue orders. In the meantime, the father continued to keep a silent but constant watch on Toby's. An old canine co-worker kept in contact by calling and sharing information tidbits about biker clubs that are allegedly active in other counties, but nothing specific indicated an immediate danger to Emma's family. But the father's instinct told him that staying behind could be expensive in the long run. Phone calls. Toby emphasized to be cautious since they could attack when you. Emma's father sadly nodded every time he scanned the perimeter of his house at night for any indication of scuffs. Tire trails or footprints from unidentified vehicles caused anxiety to rise even more when M. Green, the animal rights activist, intensified her investigation and went to Lily's, searching for any indication that Rex's father, other neighbors, or even Emma's teacher. Although no one mentioned actual cruelty, Ms. Green was concerned that the training approach was unpleasant or exploitative. Particularly in a suburban setting, the distinction between fatal force and protective canine was too blurry. Ms. Green and Ms. Hawkins, who promoted the event to show, developed a rift. How well-behaved dogs, such as former police K9S, may live with their families. The middle-positioned father attempted to plate M. Green by claiming that Rex's. She remained skeptical and kind while they concluded their training, which was solely for defense and never meant to turn the dog into a weapon. Talk with the corporation that will observe throughout these brewing conflicts. Emma battled a new mental burden. She had started to feel bad that the whole town appeared tense, in part because her school friends speculated that she would be the target of a gang because of her encounter with the bikers, causing rumors to spread. That just made her nightmares worse, and her classmates gathered around her in the lunchroom, half frightened and partly enthralled by the. Emma detested the unwanted spotlight, but had no idea that there might be criminals hiding there. When she told her father about it, he listened gravely and had no idea how to refute it. He gently reminded her that while we cannot change how we react, we can choose how we react. He encouraged her to concentrate on her regular life, completing their schoolwork, playing with rucks in their backyard, and allowing caring adults deal with the more significant issues. Emma's father heard her door in the middle of the night and discovered her curled up with wreckage, sensing that Emma's confidence was slipping. Reading in the living room under the light of a single lamp, she acknowledged in a broken voice that she felt safer when Rex was nearer a door, just in case. But he reiterated that letting Rex in broke his heart to see her being so careful. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, and stood guard was okay as long as she realized the dog wasn't a panacea for all her fears. I understand what she meant when she pressed her face into Rex's fur. It feels good. When M. Hawkins learned that one of the riders who had been apprehended had posted bail under. The local constable said that this man had dubious circumstances, connections to a larger outlaw biker network that took satisfaction in taking revenge on members who were humiliated. Miss Hawkins, concerned about the potential for retaliation, subtly told Emma's father only thanked her. His mouth nodded with stress and reiterated his inner promise to be prepared if, when difficulties arose, Toby offered to stay and told them about the bail scenario. The father was grateful for the gift, but was still hesitant to encroach on Emma's personal space for a few nights to strengthen their watch. After receiving more warnings about impending peril, they decided that Toby should conduct a series of sporadic check-ins to make sure the father and, while Emma never felt completely alone, Drew celebrated Dog Appreciation Day. Nearer, Miss Hawkins revealed a puppy training timetable, adding even another layer to the pot of roiling emotions. Section featuring Emma and Rex's presentation in a dog trick competition. Father insisted on creating a serene, amiable performance that taught Emma basic directions like sit and remain while allowing Emma to. How the dog reacted to hand signals without any aggressiveness or biting drills. Emma reluctantly anticipated the tactful display of discipline with optimism. That admiring Rex's tender side would allay her worries. But beneath her hope was the fear of what might happen if the. She whispered to her father that bikers come to cause problems, and he reassured her that the constable and Toby would be there, along with helpful neighbors, which would increase the strain, Mrs. Green's group said. Mrs. Hawkins invited them to come as well, so they could watch and perhaps understand that. Because of his humane training, the father graciously accepted their presence and expressed gratitude for having Dr. Even as he prepared for Ms. Braxton was prepared to attest to Rex's well-being. Green might be criticized if she thought the dog's threat display was overly militaristic. Of dishonest motorcyclists on the one hand and doubtful activists on the other, Emma's. Even though Emma was nervous, she found little pleasures in her father feeling pinched from all sides. In preparation for the performance, she practiced maneuvering Rex around cones and obtaining a harmless stuffed animal and answering basic calls. Every little accomplishment raised her spirits and assisted. She recalled that despite her dread, her life with Rex was also full of love and fun, which her father acknowledged. Believed these happy times were essential for Emma to see a world free from the shadows of guys on bikes, or the Ms. Green's severe look as the clock approached the dog. With the possibility of retaliation, the tension reached unprecedented heights on Appreciation Day. From the recently released biker, the animal rights organization's vigilant position, and the steadfast assistance of supporters like the internal conflict between Toby and Emma to maintain a normal, pivotal turning point. The question of whether the occasion turned into a unifying show of trust or sank into anarchy, contingent on how each component came together in a perilous conundrum that depends on a father's watchfulness, a daughter's bravery, and an extraordinary dog's capacity for tenderness. Alongside the unwavering devotion that had just moments before saved a life on that lonely road, Dog Appreciation Day drew. As it got closer, the whole town seemed to be buzzing with anticipation and anxiety. Flyers were posted all over the bulletin boards, outside the community center and grocery shop, each proclaiming a happy gathering to honor the relationship between people and their dogs. Emma, who was still struggling with her fears, discovered flashes of joy whenever she imagined showcasing Rex's tender side to the world. A very different picture to the violence he had been made to exhibit, but underlying that enthusiasm was the constant strain that would event turns into a staging ground for future problems, particularly if the bikers decide to crash it a week prior to the planned. Emma's father attended a brief planning session that Mr. Hawkins arranged in the local library's meeting room. Mrs. Green, Toby's companion, and a few other volunteers were also there. The group gathered around a huge table covered in food trays, leaflets, and hurriedly written notes regarding the day's demonstrations of therapy dogs, a display of costumes for household pets, and emphasize Emma and Rex executing a little exercise that demonstrates complacent obedience. Miss Green had a deliberately neutral countenance, but Miss Hawkins was full of energy, and she periodically raised pointed concerns regarding safety precautions if the dog has demonstrated an aggressive nature. Looking to Emma's father, she continued, "We must ensure that no child is put in danger." He nodded courteously, describing how he would be there to order Rex Miss Green, and each demonstration would take place in a roped-off area. Miss Green shrugged, half content, but her cautious eyes indicated she was still cautious. Toby, who is usually quiet, added on a depressing note, "We should also get ready for the potential of unexpected visitors." He murmured softly, "Bikers," eyes darting around the room, Miss Hawkins frowning. "This is You really think they'd make a scene at a family gathering in the middle of the day?" Toby shrugged, looking at Emma. "Some gangs may thrive on intimidation, or they may just be plain, father. Reluctantly, we have a constable or two on standby, because Petty wants revenge the most." Although Miss Hawkins wanted the day to remain optimistic, she acknowledged in a note that ignoring possible risk would be stupid. The father left the meeting feeling both relieved and tense, because at least everyone was on the same page. Same page on caution. Yet moving forward seemed to invite all of the raging disputes to come together. Ms. A curious public eager to see Emma and her brave dog, as well as Green's persistent suspicions about the biker's potential malice. On the way home, I told Toby, "I'm torn. Emma deserves a chance to show." Emma understood that Rex is more than simply a fighter, but I fear that we may once more become a target. Every time they rehearsed with Rex in the backyard, her father's eyes would get upset. Simple directions would heel, sit, and roll become so packed with significance that she was able to read the father's anxiety. She attempted to reassure him with a wobbly smile that if something went wrong at the occasion, She patted Rex's ears and whispered, "Be okay, Dad." The dog glanced between their tails, happily wagging lightly, oblivious to the complexity of people all around him. Mrs. Green suddenly made one more attempt to assess the dog's living circumstances in the days preceding the tragedy. Visiting Emma's father, who welcomed her outside while managing his annoyance after some courteous reciprocation, and even though Rex spent the majority of the evenings in their garage, he let Mrs. Green see the cozy kennel setup there. Inside, next to Emma, Miss Green snapped discreet pictures while making notes about the dog's cleanliness and ventilation space suggests that you're giving him the proper care, she acknowledged in a tone that reluctant. But the crucial issue remains how fast he can turn violent while the parent is repressing his annoyance. Miss Green offered a non-committal nod as she left, restating that Emma had simply been threatened with violence. Toby drew the father aside and mentioned that she would be watching the dog event that afternoon. The biker who had shared a picture of Bale with scars from Rex's bite had been using fresh intel. Saw in a county 1 hour away with his arm still covered in a bandage, with no direct evidence connected him to a plot against Emma's family. But Toby warned that criminals frequently waited for an opportunity to. The dog festival might be the perfect opportunity for him to make a scene. Location to publicly disgrace you or start a quarrel, Toby cautioned the fathers. As he considered calling off Emma's demonstration, his chest constricted and the prospect weighed heavy, but then he recalled Emma's amazement at the sensation of empowerment that Rex's composed demeanor might provide her. Did they have? Emma sensed the tension as the father struggled with that question and had the right to snuff that out over a maybe, and offered a solution, saying that Rex and I could perform a quick, easy demonstration. We won't act in a protective manner. Instead, he will obey so that others can see that he is secure. Her father concurred, declaring that they would end it early if there was any indication of danger. Toby pledged to set up shop next to the. In a different subplot, Miss Hawkins is detecting suspicious faces in the crowd and demonstration area. Due to the father's reservations, the local constable and an off-duty officer were sent to patrol the event's perimeter. Even assured Miss Green that additional security would guarantee that no protest looked like an attack dog show. Mr. Green, in Miss Hawkins's opinion, being cautious but not confrontational suddenly meant accepting a well-curated show. Perhaps the rumors portraying him as a savage beast could be dispelled if Emmer and Ree could demonstrate a benign synergy. The father's greatest fear is that public censure could turn into acclaim, closing the distance between. On the eve of dogfights, there are those who consider K9s as dangerous weapons, and those who saw them as devoted protectors. Every subplot converged on Appreciation Day, as there was a lot of excitement in the community. Families with children in particular anxiously anticipated seeing cute puppies playing costumes and with trained dogs, doing entertaining acts, while some are more nervous because they fear the enormous crowd could pose a ideal setting for the bikers' vengeance. Emma remembered her father's soothing words as she lay in bed the previous evening. During her last exercises, confidently lead Rex and demonstrate to the world that he is more than simply a security dog. He is your companion. Said goodnight to Rex in a whisper while embracing his neck. The dog looked at him and tapped his tail on the ground as though to indicate that he had. They prepared a child, puppy, and father because they wanted to support her no matter what dawn brought. And the community is preparing for an occasion that might either bring the town together in a gesture of kindness or send them back into turmoil if ancient dangers resurfaced. A storm erupted through a brilliant blue sky with a warm, nearly blinding sun. By 10 o'clock, the municipal park was finally ready for the ideal day to relieve the stress that existed beneath Dog Appreciation Day, packed with happy people, families, and a variety of dogs wagging their tails. Booths for local rescues had been set up, and there was a flurry of children displaying their pets, merchants selling dog treats, and, for those who dare, a little obstacle course in anticipation. Yes, but as many people know, Emma and her incredible German Shepherd Rex were also there at this event. The primary task Emma's father and Toby discreetly organized last-minute inspections. The park's perimeter was patrolled by a local utility and an off-duty police officer. With a clipboard in hand, Miss Hawkins rushed around, making sure the timetable went without a hitch. Emma and Rex stood composedly near a roped-off demonstration area and a basic raised platform by the stage area, practicing the mild routine they had developed, which included fundamental commands, a lighthearted retrieve, and basic obedience that shown the dog's reactivity without resorting to violence. But the parent was unable to shake an uneasy feeling. Although nothing seemed particularly wrong, his instincts advised him to be cautious. Toby, tapping into his old army instincts, periodically looked throughout the crowd for faces they didn't recognize, especially those who matched the bikers. Ms. Green, an advocate for animal protection, hovered close to the protest. Zone's arms crossed, but more curious than disapproving. Dr. Braxton's look, happy in a purple jacket, wandered around, discussing responsible training with guests and complimenting Emma's. Hearing that support, the father felt a glimmer of comfort for his meticulous techniques. Perhaps Miss Green might. Finally, if all went smoothly, Lily raced up to them, panting, just before Emma's performance started. She pulled on Emma's hand and screamed, "This is the largest crowd I've seen in ages." Emma gave a bright smile, hesitantly looks around the sea of families gathered around the stage. Rex. When a child approached to say something, she would sit by her side with her ears perked up and her tail wagging. Hello. But he was still under Emma's authority, wearing a tight-fitting but soft collar. He is now tranquil, as Emma's father reminded her to maintain his calmness by focusing on positive energy. Emma nodded and released a reassuring breath as Miss Hawkins finally onto the tiny platform, holding a microphone and extending a warm greeting. She invited a local trainer to showcase agility with a bounding border on Dog Appreciation Day. Collie, Then a costume competition that made people laugh and applaud chihuahuas wearing small cowboy hats of golden. Perhaps Emma's jitters were calmed by the wholesome atmosphere and the dog in a tutu. Perhaps everything would go smoothly. But when Mrs. Hawkins introduced Emma's demonstration, Toby's voice, he muttered, "Hey, there's a biker," over the father's earpiece, a covert walkie-talkie arrangement they had put up. "I'm on him, but he might simply be walking past in the tall black jacket near the east door." Emma swallowed, but she turned to face Rex as the father's spine tingled, and he noticed her nodding slightly to signal caution. As Miss Hawkins led them to the presentation area, she gave him a gentle pat before entering the. Emma and Rex confronted a large crowd in a makeshift ring, including elderly people in the yard and parents with toddlers on their shoulders. Emma's father joined them, and Miss Green with arms folded and ran puppy lovers, keeping close. Mrs. Hawkins deliberately omitted when introducing Emma as the courageous young handler and her amazing shepherd. In order to maintain a cheerful tone, Emma blushed and gave a bashful wave before starting to talk about the biker attack. The crowd said in delight as the simple, friendly instruction for Rex to sit, roll over, and jump gently through a hoop. Even with Ms. Green's stern gaze, the big dog obeyed the little child with ease, a small smile that was fluttering at the corners of her mouth as Emma was getting ready for the last retrieval trick. A faraway engine RPM sliced the air during a demonstration in which Rex would delicately pick up a soft toy from the ground. Toby's anxious voice crackled in his earpiece as the father's hold on the demonstration rope tightened. He has another bike behind him, the father, so he's not alone. Looked at Miss Hawkins, who went pale, and she mouthed the words, "Remain calm." Parents nearby drew their attention to Toby's warning as two motorcycles roared to a halt just past the main gathering. Uncertain if it was a coincidence or a threat, children aside, Emma's heart pounded when she saw the familiar. One rider's cheek had a scar, and memories of the chain, the sneer, and the attack came flooding back. She forced herself to blink. She turned her attention to Rex, who noticed her change in attitude. The dog's ears flattened momentarily, and he gave a deep rumble. With a rumble in his throat, the father moved forward to block Emma's view from the protest ring. Miss Hawkins, one of the bikers, attempted to resume her commentary while quivering a little, as though she was expecting the men would just observe and depart. But Scar Cheek had other plans, so he turned off the engine and leaped off his bike and strolled past the gathering, ignoring another biker's tight stares. Stayed unreadable on the second motorbike helmet on POS here, but it was nice to see you. Snarling, scar-faced eyes darting to Emma and Rex, a tiny circle of. The father's jaw tensed as bystanders split apart, unsure whether to intervene or run, but he forced a composed tone. Scar Cheek mocked, exposing a bandaged face at a public occasion. No issue needed. Forearm that brought back memories of his run-in with Rex. I simply want to see this dog that almost ripped my arm off and spat. Perhaps repay the favor. As tension increased, and several spectators shifted in anxiety, brought out phones, apparently in preparation to record the father or call the police, and placed a gentle touch on Emma's. The other shoulder, close to Rex's collar, made Emma's heart race. Rex gave a deep snarl and stiffened the father as the man approached. Repeated the code phrase for hold in the hopes that his daughter would stay calm, but the presence of Scar Cheek crackled with. Miss Green, who was off to the side, was divided between dread and protest. Toby tried to hide behind the motorcyclist by squeezing through the crowd so the father wouldn't notice him. They were aware that a single spark may start the dreaded collision in the engines. The encounter reached a perilous peak with scarred cheeks as it cooled, and the watchers held their collective breath. The scene was created by the father's protective posture, Vengeance's gaze at Emma, and Rex's composed anxiety, reminiscent of that lonely road, but with the father's mob increased. Sadly, they came to the realization that despite their best efforts, Emma's relationship with Rex would not pass the last test. The question of whether training and community support could stop violence, or whether this cameo by the bikers group would descend into anarchy, teetering on the brink of a single order, a single gesture, or a glimpse of. The air felt electrified around the Canine Appreciation Day demonstration ring, which everyone was staring at despite the constraint on both sides. The threatening motorcyclist and the quiet tension between Emma and Rex. even though everyone had come to celebrate the touching relationship between people and their canine friends. This surprising. Emma's father stood rigidly in front of her shoulders, and the moment was captured by showdown. Rex, a composed sentinel by his side, was displaying resentment and possibly looking for. In retaliation for previous humiliation, Toby moved slowly and deliberately through shock. The intruder's few parents were able to hide behind spectators, who attempted to shout warnings or indicate the father, but the silence that pervaded the space was almost palpable, and they were prevented from screaming. The father gave Emma a short glance, observing her frightened eyes and shaking fingers as they touched Rex's collar. She appeared prepared to give an order if necessary, but the father gave a brief, comforting shake of his head, saying, "Not yet." This is the mute that interfered with my voice because Scar stopped a few yards away from him and glared at Rex. Had a taunting edge, but Emma's father noticed a hint of caution. Possibly the biker remembered the traumatic. Even though the tone was contemptuous, I could still picture Rex's jaws clamping down on his arm. He gave the throng a leering smile, implying that he would arrive with a point to prove what the issue was. Now when the road isn't deserted, you're scared that the father's gaze met your scar-faced one. Maintaining a steady tone of voice and remembering that this is a public gathering for families, you must. Left the area surrounded by onlookers who either stood frozen in place or recorded with their phones as a few kids whimpered. Corwin, who was on the periphery and holding to their parents, looked at Ms. Hawkins, who was hovering close to the. She left the stage microphone in her palm, and a sour laugh leaked out of her cheek. "Who's gonna make me your fancy guard dog, that kid?" He spat on the ground. With a sneer and a twist of his lips, Rex gave Emma a guttural look. Emma swallowed a hard heart, her ears hammering, and she might growl with her fangs. Sensed the father tensing as well, but he maintained a composed stance at that very moment. "Toby." Voice low, you heard him tap Scar's shoulder from behind. "This is a calm. Getting together. Why not leave?" The biker flinched in surprise at Toby's. For a brief moment, he appeared to be torn between running away and starting a fight. The tension was so intense that believed that even the smallest action could lead to violence, and the father refused to give up the opportunity to act aggressively. Drew on. Following his instincts as a former canine trainer, he lifted his hand palm up in a calming motion. He stated in a forceful but non-threatening tone that nobody wants trouble and that we're only here to. He glanced at Emma and urged her to not rehash a quarrel, saying, "Celebrate, dogs." Her hold on Rex's collar tightened. Her face turned pale and her cheeks were scarred. A glimmer of rage crossed his face as he realized he was boxed in by Toby behind him and the father and Rex in front of him. Got his features as he became aware that the phones in the crowd were recording every second. So even if he wanted to start a fight, the chances were. He shifted restlessly while stacked against him and mumbled a curse. "Remember what that mutt did?" He growled, though not as confidently. The local constable and an off-duty police in the crowd feared that the stalemate would turn into intermittent violence. Nearer hands were holstered, and one said, "Sir, move away or we'll have." When faced with law enforcement, the bravery to interfere faltered. However, as he gave Emma and Rex one last glance, a hateful light remained in his eyes. You were fortunate that he spat out a resentful voice before making it dramatic. A tight stillness fell as he snorted, spun around, and stormed off, shoving past Toby. Engines roared to life as he reunited with his helmeted accomplice on their bikes, and a few moments later they ripped. Relief filled the park as they vanished into the far-off roadways, leaving a trail of dust behind them, yet the energy. Emma let go of the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding Rex in until the day felt permanently changed. Defense mode, lowering his hackles and twitching his ears as if he were hearing the crowd's collective sigh. Miss Hawkins' trembling breath caused her to suddenly stop talking and turn off her microphone. After asking a few people if anyone was harmed, Deputy Amar Expression Stern promptly radioed in a notice regarding the bikers. Leaving, a number of onlookers came up to Emma right away, complimenting her poise and Rex for not overreacting to Ms. Green, who'd watched the entire scene from a distance, then moved forward, appearing a little shaky, and offered Emma's father a. Her initial skepticism was eased by the fact that once more instead of displaying mindless aggression, The dog had just snarled, noticed gently, didn't fight or rush at the father, and nodded while looking her in the eyes. There was a contemplative hush in the air because we train him to react to real dangers rather than incite them. Ms. Emma shuddered in a mix of relief and embarrassment as Green lowered her head in what appeared to be an apology, or at least an acknowledgement. Remaining fear pushed against Rex, whispering softly that he hadn't hurt anyone. When a tear fell down her cheek, the father bent down and gave her a tender embrace. "Went well." He muttered that the best thing we could hope for was that nobody was harmed. Toby followed them in scanning the horizon, offered Emma a comforting nod as though he was half expecting the motorcyclist to return, happy that the threat had passed. Despite being shaken, the event went on, but there was still a lingering feeling that they had just missed a larger catastrophe. A calm throng returned to the planned celebrations, with some departing early to prevent more conflict and others remaining to observe the protest that Ms. Hawkins returned to with shaky poise. After giving it some thought, the father gave Emma permission to continue, resolved not to let triumph be afraid, and so Rex performed. His serene, light-hearted performance for a crowd that now fully appreciated the dog's self-control was just as remarkable as his. Emma's protective instincts in the ring led Rex to perform mild exercises, pulling out a stuffed animal, navigating between cones, and following basic heel and sit. Every effective command was met with applause, and the cheers, Ms. Green, were tinged with awe. Continued to observe carefully, and at the end she went up to Miss Token and softly acknowledged that the presentation displayed a K-9 training aspect that focused on unity rather than. Miss Token, relieved by the violence, smiled gratefully, and the day came to an end, with a feeling of achievement, as well as an unavoidable knowledge that the biker's last venom could pretend. Scar-cheeks, Vala clung to additional trouble when the immediate conflict had been resolved without anyone being hurt. For the moment, though, Emma was thankful and gripped Rex's fur. Before going home, the father secretly prayed that love and discipline had triumphed over vengeance. Furthermore, without anyone knowing, shadows lingered close to Destiny's finale, where everything they had learned about courage, trust, and the final confrontation or resolution would be required. Dark clouds collected, revealing an unbreakable link between a girl and her exceptional dog. During the days after the heated confrontation on Dog Appreciation Day in the small town, when Emma's kind demonstration with Rex had effectively displayed his composed compliance, Scar-cheek's appearance and his associate left a lasting impression on the community's relief. Whispers flew through the neighborhood diner and grocery aisles. Would the bikers make a forceful comeback, or did they go abruptly? Harold A. Her biggest obstacle was whether it was a planned retaliation against Emma Nightfall or a last-ditch retreat. Rex woke up and nestled up next to her bed, her heart racing with every sound of the wind or distant motorbike rev. Seeing her nervousness, he became more vigilant, examining her hair and adding, "Motion sensor lights are installed in the backyard, and Toby and the constable are discreetly working together to increase patrol frequency." Even these steps were unable to completely eliminate the underlying anxiety that permeated every discussion. Emma was working on her homework in the evening under a dim lamp when there was a frightened knock on the door. After responding, she and her father discovered Ms. Green standing on the porch with a flushed face. The father tensed up, hesitant to attend another lecture, but Miss Green, startled, she continued, "I wanted to apologize." Her shoulders bent. "I've been looking into your case remotely, but after witnessing Rex's actions during the event and how kind she clarified that although she still had worries about dogs, I realized my anxieties were unfounded. Now that she was combat trained, she realized that not all K-9 techniques translated into Emma's father becoming softer toward her. Sincerely thanking her, Mrs. Green provided careful assistance if the family required assistance contacting local authorities, or, "Now that I see in the media that he is a guardian rather than a weapon," she acknowledged giving Emma. The air outside crackled with an impending rainstorm as Mrs. Green gave a short, courteous nod. Emma breathed a sigh of relief as they left under the first raindrops inside. Although the tension appeared to have subsided, the storm continued to rage that night, with lightning clawing She clung near Rex in the sky, more alarmed by the unidentified danger of motorcyclists than by any inherent temperance of the father. She paced close to the glass, sharing her uneasiness as the lightning illuminated the empty space. Streets, but any motor roar could be interpreted as a warning sign of impending danger. When Toby reported that Bing's time was indeed gone, a glimmer of peace returned. For a few days, none of his contacts had seen the biker gang in neighboring counties. They may have gone on. During a phone conversation, the father permitted a cautious optimism. Maybe Scar's pride was sufficiently injured to prevent him from forming, at least for the time being. However, half of him stayed vigilant, following the proverb that says criminals with damaged egos rarely forget a grudge. Emma slowly tried to return to normal during this lull and requested to resume her, occasionally taking shorter routes and earlier in the day for walks with Rex, but still showing defiance against fear. Father was hesitant, but Toby and the constable offered to follow at a safe distance, so on in the afternoon, Emma led Rex along a well-traveled pavement close to the school. Although it wasn't the abandoned back road of the initial assault, it represented a step towards independence and gave me butterflies. Danced in her stomach, but each time Rex gave her a softly assured look. She saw someone with courage go by and gave them a warm greeting, with some of them complimenting Rex with silent admiration, while some merely nod in respect. But Emma, as Rex turned a curve, she noticed a figure in leather close to the petrol station, and her heart skipped a beat. Stumbled, but upon closer inspection, an unthreatening elderly man in a chic motorbike jacket was seen. Immense relief set through her, even as her heart rate still high. Recognizing that even the smallest hint of a motorcycle aesthetic could make her feel anxious, Rex nuzzled her. Her fingers, finding comfort in the father's tacit affirmation. Toby in the passenger seat, watching from a parked automobile, sighed quietly. He whispered as he watched Emma continue. Maybe she can overcome this. Walk. The father gave a slight nod of gratitude, appreciating every little victory Drew. Even though Emma was farther away from the shadow of terror, a faint pang of caution still pulled at. When the local constable delivered a term message a man matching him, the last days before the climax arrived. According to Scar's statement, Ed was seen requesting directions to a distant barn on the outskirts of town, region that residents rarely use. The constable was anxious and patrolled the area, but discovered no evidence of him. Dr. Braxton heard of farmhands' rumors that a stranger on a bike promised money in exchange for information about a former police officer who had a K9, but the narrative was not confirmed, which made the father furrow his brow and worry that the motorcyclists, or at least the Scar, came back covertly within these underlying themes. Miss Hawkins wrapped up her follow-up article about the father's K9 expertise, emphasizing how a tragedy had been avoided via discipline training. To Emma's house to present a manuscript that struck a balance between a cautionary tale and the touching tale of a girl and her dog. Story of vigilantes following the father's reading of grateful but anxious M. Hawkins issued a polite warning. I won't post locations or images that jeopardize your. She promised safety, but you should get some recognition for having a dog who saved a. When Emma overheard, she experienced mixed feelings of pride that Rex was acknowledged. The father's anxiety heightened the following morning when he realized that additional publicity could be a sign of disaster. Reported footprints close to the father's fence boot tracks, coming from a side alley shortly after returning from an early run. Even if they may be innocent, they disappear into the moist grass as they pass the parent. Believed each new irregularity, a random footprint, or an unknown to be a sign of intimidation or scouting. The distant bike added to the growing impression that a decisive confrontation was imminent. Emma snatched parts of adult whispers and stole them from out of sight. Unexpectedly, she assured Rex in a whisper, "We won't be afraid if they come." Tension reached a breaking point, with each character preparing for a potential final conflict with those who endangered Emma's tranquilly on the surface. Life continued as usual. Ms. Hawkins polished her piece, Ms. Green stepped in, and Emma continued to attend school, returning from her scrutiny, and the father kept up a stoic facade. But in the silence underneath daily activities, the electric fear of impending peril made people wonder if Scary and his cronies would reappear or if cautionary law would take over. Remained unknown, but everyone sensed that the bark or the roar of an automobile may break the fragile atmosphere of tranquility. Of a watchful dog, the father Toby and their alert companions readied themselves for whatever ultimate challenge life could present. Wishing to end this chapter without any bloodshed, trusting solely in the relationship between a child, her father, and the dog who stood prepared to defend her at all costs. And as evening descended, a late autumn chill crept across the town, painting the sky in. Emma's home was filled with rich purples and blues, and there was an eerie stillness. Toby's extra sweeps and the neighbors' attentive attention did not stop her father from pacing the living room with a phone in hand. Depue's patrols revealed evidence of someone skulking about the fence, including thin boot prints and the low purr of. Although there had not been a direct altercation since the biker's brazen, a motorbike was heard idling 2 streets away. The father's instincts were aflutter with the knowledge that a last confrontation was imminent after his appearance at the dog tournament. That night, Toby's torched shoulders showed signs of tension. He said, "Something's off. I noticed a motorbike parked behind the old hardware store, with no plate man in sight." The father nodded gravely, as if they were waiting, and they silently decided to uphold. Emma was working on her homework at the kitchen table during the night when she heard snippets of quiet. She had grown tired of this constant vigilance and longed for normalcy when a tremor of anxiety shot through her throughout the talk. Life, but a glint of determination appeared in her eyes as Rex lay at her feet. Around 9, Toby went for a stroll around the perimeter with a sense of her mood, her ears snapping up every time a shadow passed the window. The father put the torch away, shut the doors, and put Emma in her bedroom, telling her to cry out if, when she heard something odd, he moved to the side of the living room and turned out the lights to prevent, bringing attention to the oppressive silence of the house, which was only broken by the ticking of the clock, while the wind rustled outside. Every scrape from the fallen leaves on the porch made the father tense, and memories of his canine days came flooding back, recalling stakeouts where criminals would frequently strike during downtime, if they. "We can't be caught off guard," he told himself. Shortly after 10, Toby returned. Grim, the house face, mumbled one as he noticed 2 men skulking down the alley. The father clenched his jaw and sent a signal to remain silent, possibly indicating scar cheek. Rex's ears perked up as he put a finger to his lips, causing a low rumble to stir in his. Emma's cheeks turned cold when she heard muffled footsteps outside her door. The father beckoned her back, saying, "Remain in your room if anything happens." She nodded, her eyes sparkling, but the door was closed, allowing Rex to handle it if we called him. Determination triumphed over dread, and then the father saw a form moving by the fence through the window's edge. When the torch beam flickered and eventually broke off, Toby gestured for him to follow silently. With a tiny baton in hand, the father crept out into the cool air, leaving Rex and Emma inside to keep her safe. He and Toby slithered into the moonless nighttime shadows that stretched across the yard. Hearts were thumping in the corner, and 2 silhouettes were indeed crouching close to the barrier, tinkering with something metal, probably in an attempt to break through a gate or interfere with the father's garden lights. Just as Toby, one figure, ready to provide a warning, whirled around and shone a torch in their faces, blinding them with the intensity. For a brief period, the father recognized a rough voice hissing in search of us. That sneer scar cheek gave him a rush of energy. Toby lifted. Before any words could ease the tension, he moved his arms slightly between the father and the intruders. Inside the home, Emma heard a man unlock a collapsible baton of his own and brandish it with a smile. Fear tightening her chest, she looked at Rex, who was standing, and cursed through the window. Emma cautiously opened the closed door while keeping a close eye on it. Her nose was up in readiness, unable to handle the powerlessness. The father and Toby are seen looking down at 2 men through the window curtain. Her pulse pounded when she saw his unique scar, which was lit by a neighbor's porch light. Should she stay? Father had instructed her to lock the door, but if Rex was in danger, she was torn between hiding him and bringing him out. Scar Cheek hissed at Toby, humiliating us with that fancy dog, and was indecisive outdoors. Embarrassed me by spitting, and now we're repaying him. The father attempted to remain composed and spoke quietly, "But don't do this. Possess a phone. We can quickly call the police." But Scarface laughed bitterly and raised the same weapon, a chain. In her nightmare, Emma remembered Toby tensing the baton at the ready bracing for. The father's heart pounded as he realized that assistance was too far away to prevent an immediate attack if the soldiers hurried them. Men rushed forward, and then a loud bark broke the stillness and shattered a window. Came open, and Rex jumped out, thumping softly to the ground while Emma stood, wide-eyed behind the sill. She had disregarded the father's edict but trusted her instincts, letting go of Rex with a brief order. When Emma returned inside, his father's eyes widened with alarm and relief, and he exclaimed, "Vote tight," with fierce protection. But the dog was already running across the yard, ready to defend itself, and the scar on its cheek swore. Toby stumbles back when he sees the enormous German shepherd lunging at him, seeing an opportunity to knock the baton from. The father moved forward to stop Scary from swinging wildly in that heartbeat due to the second man's hand. Rex precisely clamped onto his chain as he swung it around, causing the metallic clank to strike the grass. Shouted in agony or amazement as the scarred cheek reverberated through the garden, reeling from the dog's controlled force in the meantime. With swift jabs, Toby pushed the second assailant away, preventing him from infiltrating farther into the building. Emma shivered as she observed the home from the window, knowing that Rex had been trained to prevent fatal injury, but she was afraid to watch him fighting in real life. But her father had a glimmer of pride, taught properly, and the dog battled with skill and discipline rather than mindless fury. Utterly outmatched, attempted to escape, and swore. The father yelled a brief instruction, a single coded word telling Rex to hold without damaging the man howled as the dog obeyed, pinning Scar's arm without digging its teeth into the flesh. Headlights flared at the edge of the yard as the Depue's cruiser was forced to the ground, and it screeched to A. Neighbors watched from illuminated windows as the siren sounded, and several went outside too. As the constable walked toward Scar, observed Toby disarm the second biker, and then raise his hands to indicate he wasn't resisting. Rex pinned him and flailed in a futile attempt to quickly free the father. Ordered Rex to let go, controlling the dog's anger. The constable and an off-duty police arrived with their pistols drawn. In a matter of seconds, both motorcyclists were restrained and cuffed while yelling at Toby and the father. Emma let out a trembling gasp and threatened to cry through her bare teeth. Still, she shut the window, and when she stumbled to open the door, the father was gasping from Rex by her side. "You're safe," he said as Emma raced into his arms, turning his adrenaline. In an emotional whisper, the father knelt down and gave them each a comforting hug. The Depue's radio crackled overhead, pouring through him and shouting for backup and paramedics to evaluate minor wounds in that whirlpool of flashing lights, angry offenders, and the realization that Emma's family had achieved the pinnacle of their ordeal. A last test of training courage shocked their neighbors, and love that ended without harming anyone. A karma the next morning. Beyond a few trampled feet, the neighborhood showed no signs of the previous night's craziness as sunrise swept over it. Emma woke up in her own bed, Rex, to patches of grass and the lingering murmur of relief. Even though her sleep had been restless, she felt a buoyant sense of safety that she hadn't experienced in. After a last altercation that left no one gravely injured, she and her father had survived the storm for weeks. Everyone's lessons were learned outside as the father stood on the porch with the phone to his ear, narrating the incident involving his former co-worker Captain Ruiz Toby, who rested on the porch railing with his arms folded and nodded occasionally. In agreement, the father's voice conveyed a deep sense of satisfaction that they were both taken into custody. Them up. Nobody was seriously hurt. Only their egos were damaged, according to Early. According to police reports, Scar and his partner were charged with trespassing, attempted violence, and violating release terms if additional information revealed connections to the previous case, as the father was aware that the judicial proceedings could be drawn out. He felt relieved that the G was unlikely to take a chance on such disasters for A. Emma and her father shared a quiet connection in the kitchen during breakfast. As she passed between them, she set a bowl of kibble on the ground for Rex to watch, And for once, the dog ate while wagging its tail. Emma discovered that her hands were not shaking, and she did not feel a lurch of fear in her stomach. Rex gave her father a short glance that was an unconscious acknowledgement of the trust they had developed through each of their trials. The conversation produced a kind grin. "You did well, kid," he said, ruffling Emma's hair, Emma's cheeks, and Rex both whispered back that we couldn't have done it. Any of it by itself shortly after the bikers' unsuccessful ambush became widely known. Some of the town's neighbors arrived with baked delicacies to congratulate Emma and her father for ending the intimidation by the gang, including Ms. Green, the animal rights. The advocate who had previously examined Rex's training showed up with a little bouquet eye. Was incorrect to criticize your tactics so harshly. She quietly acknowledged that your dog had saved her once more while avoiding death. Clearly, this is a link of caring rather than malice, despite what the father initially believed. Guarded shook her hand, acknowledging the change in her viewpoint in the midst of these. Sees Toby as he gets ready to go, enjoying a peaceful cup of coffee on the porch. He and the father thought back on their previous canine days, including the discipline lessons, the heartbreak of losing good dogs, and we never imagined that we would require such training in civilian life again, the father said, but it saved innocent lives. I patted Toby's shoulder in appreciation for always having our backs. Toby simply smiled and gave Emma a light-hearted salute before leaving with the assurance that the neighborhood was at last safe. Ms. Hawkins, who is constantly searching for a moving tail, finished up her covering with an insightful article called From Shadows to Light that explains how a dog is trained. And a courageous young woman dispelled dread by showcasing Emma's fortitude, the father's subdued leadership, and the public's response to the community's eventual unity against the threat was largely positive, applauding the father's fair-minded criticism of the bikers' wrongdoings and admiration for Rex's self-control. In order to protect their home from prying eyes, the father asked that the story not include any personal information regarding lethal force. Miss Hawkins, who is still lurking online, complied by emphasizing the universal lesson that fear may be overcome by bravery, particularly when Emma, supported by a loyal friend at school, discovered anew. The anxious whispers were no longer accepted by her peers. Instead, they were kind, or a few children timidly requested. Even her teacher, Ms. Calwell, set up a show if Rex could come and share a story that made her laugh. Emma's story serves as a real-life illustration of how animals may teach us about safety and compassion with dogs. Emma felt tears well up in her eyes as she sat in that classroom, realizing that she was being protected, yet remaining a member of a family. This time, she had recovered her feeling of normalcy with a greater understanding of. In the last days of this chapter, a calm Sunday dawned bright and clear, symbolizing what she and Rex stood for to others around them. Warm, the father asked Emma to go back to the location of the previous backroad walk. It formerly held the worst memories. Anxious, but resolute, she concurred with Rex. Together, they trotted down the dirt lane at her side, as the sounds of. Although the incident was still in the back of her mind, she felt more confident because of her father and the devoted shepherd. Every stride she took felt like a symbolic reclamation of her freedom. The father looked around from time to time, but no. Instead, the silence of rustling meadows and far-off bird music concealed danger, surrounded them as it had before dread took hold, all the way to the point where Emma's confrontation started. She paused and knelt down, allowing Rex to sniff the ground as though remembering their shared. Meanwhile, her father kept a careful eye on her in a fatherly manner that had become second nature. Emma let out a trembling breath, tears sparkling, but a soft grin came on her face. "We're all right," she whispered, massaging Rex's ears while the father held her shoulder. Nodded. And when they got home, the father noticed a drop in his weight from. After criminals realized that their intimidation simply strengthened the community's determination, Toby was right in his heart. They gave in, and the father promised to use cautious caution while realizing life's unpredictable nature. Acknowledged that Emma's purity merited additional room to grow, and he took a noisy ball out of cupboard. Shocked Emma by playing a spontaneous game in the backyard for Rex, and soon after, laughing erupted into the warm air. Every chuckle is evidence of relief from this tale of Emma and her loyal dog Rex. and their struggle against fear struck a chord with you. We encourage you to join the discussion by subscribing to our watch for additional true tales of bravery, devotion, and the remarkable ties that exist between people and their animals. Please like and share this video to help spread the word that empathy and effective training can protect the. We want you to share your personal stories of how dogs or other animals can remain innocent even in the face of the most dire threats. Together, let's commemorate the ways that pets have inspired, soothed, or protected you. The world is reminded by the power of compassion that a loyally guided heart cannot be overcome by any amount of intimidation. And affection as the family's tranquilly returns, and Emma's life gradually fades away from the last echoes of the biker's threat, returned to a somewhat normal state, and the father was sure to keep a close watch on the perimeter, and Rex continued to do sporadic workouts to maintain his skills. But no, Emma and her kind companion went along the once feared road, regaining each step as the fear no longer defined their days. Her father's relief glistened in his proud eyes as she gained confidence. They had conquered the darkest period of Emma's life by relying on their relationship with Rex and the encouraging spirit of the community. Childhood, the path from terror to triumph, served as a reminder to all of us that even the most vulnerable can stand tall with faith, a resolute canine ally, and faith. Fighting the most dangerous storms in life,